Good evening, everyone. I think this is a very important topic and we have a very distinguished panel. I hope you will enjoy the discussions over the next 45 minutes. This is a very hot subject on climate change. We always talk of climate change in the future tense, but I think we should be now talking about it in the present tense because climate change is already upon us. You can see the impact of that on a day-to-day basis. We have actually seen climate change in terms of increased temperatures, uncertain and unpredictable rainfalls, flooding, droughts, and abiotic stress. What we call as abiotic stress has gone up on the crops, and as we saw in the earlier presentation by our friend from Zimbabwe, that 65% of yield can be lost due to abiotic stress. I think that is a very important statistics we must remember. That's a data point we must remember, that when temperatures go up in future, there could be very severe yield drops. And this is something which is there in many studies about climate change, that with every 1 degree increase in temperature, there could be 20 to 25% drop in yield. And wheat is expected to be the worst sufferer in the coming decades. So this is also something which results in some new pests and diseases. You know, climate change is not only something which is related to temperature and rainfall, but it is also related to the emergence of new pests and diseases. So I think there is a lot that happens through climate change, and we must be aware of that it could lead to severe yield losses, not only in India, all over the world. So we are here to discuss how to handle this situation. I think we all understand clearly what can happen with climate change, but what is it that we have to do, and what is it that we can do to actually address this situation? So we have very eminent panel here, like I mentioned before. We have Dr. Liu from Singapore.
Thank you.
And he is from Pacific Agri Science, Singapore. We have Komal Shah from Sulphur Mills. And she comes with a specific expertise, which we will tap into as we go into the discussion. Then we have Dr. Anand Pandravada, who is from Kottawa, and he is a breeding and technology expert, which also is an area which we must explore as we try to go into the details. We are waiting for Professor Ashwin Chatre from ISB, so as and when he joins, we will also bring him into the discussion. So we have 45 minutes. After my initial thoughts like this, I would like each of the panel members to spend about 5 minutes giving your opening statements on a subject of your choice. We have actually identified a few subjects like how do you build climate resilient products and agronomic practices, or how do you use science and technology, how do you educate farmers and other stakeholders, and also dietary habits, nutrition, and various other things related to that. Then what are the policy imperatives? These are the 4 subjects on which we would like to discuss, and each panel member is free to choose whatever they would like to talk about. So we will start with Dr. Liu from Singapore. Okay. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm CS Liu from Pacific Agri Science, Singapore. I have 40 over years of experience in crop protection. I started out, I'm an agronomist and pest management graduate from Iowa State University, and have worked for multinationals over the years. And one of the first countries that I visited when I started my career was actually India, right? So that was way back in 1980. So in the last 5 years, I have been focusing on M&A, mergers and acquisitions, putting together deals, right? So I help, I'm a matchmaker for companies that want to acquire another company or companies that want to sell, but mostly in the crop protection, crop nutrition space. So, and I also, of course, help companies raise working capital, R&D capital, companies that have good technologies that want to go global. I also make them with global partners. So what I want to address today in terms of climate change is along the lines of, climate change is something that we cannot stop, right? It is going to progress, it's going to go on. We can maybe decelerate the process, but we cannot stop it. So in terms of agriculture, what can we do? We have to adapt to this climate change phenomenon, right? So there are various aspects that I can think of. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, is drought, right? With climate change, you're going to have extremes in weather. Dry areas, dry regions are going to get drier. And then when it comes to rainfall, rain-fed countries, you're going to have more floods, right? So, and then in the temperate areas, it's going to get colder. And in the tropics, it's going to get hotter. Or in the summers, it's going to get hotter anyway. So you're going to have a lot of situations where you have drought. So what do we do? So one of the technologies available, of course, is microbial species that can help to extend the root system. So what comes to mind? Mycorrhiza. Lots of different strains are out there in the market now, right? And many companies, including ones in India, are constantly researching to find better strains, more effective strains of mycorrhiza, because mycorrhiza can extend the root system to pick up nutrients as well as moisture from deep down in the soil profile, right? But having said that, the problem is when you put all these microbes, microbial products out in the field, they tend to not survive, not do well. So one of the areas that I'm focusing on, working with certain companies in South America, is to develop a matrix that will load all these microorganisms to help when put out in the soil, they actually thrive, they actually grow, multiply rather than die. So this is a very novel matrix that they have developed, right? Then in another area is obviously breeding for drought resistance. Here, we're not going to do any more GMOs. The latest technology out there is gene editing, which is a lot faster, a lot cheaper than GMO or genetic modification, right? Genetic modification takes about 15, 16 years of research, of trials, and takes about $140 million to come up with one trait. Gene editing is accelerating that whole process to down to 5-6 years and only $5 million. So going forward, you can imagine explosive activities in the gene editing area. And fortunately, in the Americas, they do not regulate gene editing like they regulate GMO. So gene editing is not deemed to be GMO. And India, too, has announced a few months ago that they will likewise not regulate gene editing as GMO, right? So a third area I can think of, I think was already discussed, right? Using drones, right? As we go forward with climate change, as I said, you're going to see less rainfall in dry regions of the world. So even applications of pesticides, fertilizers is going to have a big impact. Drones will use a lot less water, as a carrier for the pesticides. And also in hilly areas, right, it's very difficult to have high volume spray, so drones come in. So this is another area. And India, as mentioned earlier by Dhanuka, is in the forefront now developing this drone technology. So finally, what I also want to say is that with climate change, there's tremendous opportunity to change certain agronomic practices. One of the participants here was telling me about mulching, right? Plastic mulching or even natural mulching to conserve moisture, right? To encourage no-till agriculture, which is already very big in Australia and many other countries. But in India, this is something that needs to be looked at as well, right? And finally, climate change allows even crop inputs companies, suppliers, to have this opportunity to develop a process where you supply farmers with a whole package of technologies, a whole package of ag tech that we have just mentioned earlier in the discussion, as well as what I've mentioned earlier. So instead of being a threat to your business, it's a great opportunity if you can put together an entire package of technologies and products, especially for small farmers in India. I always wondered, how on earth would small farmers such as those in India be able to benefit from all this ag tech? I think there are companies now in India itself moving in that direction, trying to get to the ground level to address this. And if you can put together an entire package, then it becomes efficient to go to the farm level, right? Otherwise, no. Only the big farmers will benefit from all this ag tech. So that's more or less what I want to say. Lots of opportunities there with climate change. Right.
Thank you. Those are all very important and very good suggestions you have got, Dr. Liu. So, when we talk of climate change, we talk of soil, we talk of water, we talk of environment. All the three can get damaged, or all the three can get depleted. And natural resources, for example, like water, soil, are all under threat because of climate change. So I think we will come back to you with some questions on natural resource conservation, but you can think about that meanwhile. We will now move to Komal Shah, because any technology, any new products, any new agronomic practices, like Dr. Liu mentioned about minimum tillage, and there is a host of other new agronomic practices. We talk about direct seeded rice here to reduce water consumption. We might talk of high density planting systems to reduce the depletion of soils, and various other things. So, but any innovation on these fronts has to be adopted by the farmers, right? Otherwise, it's of no use. It will remain in the laboratory or on the shelf. So how do we carry it to the farmers? How do we educate them? How do we make sure that the farmers not only adopt them, but also get the full benefit out of that? I think those are some of the aspects, the marketing aspects of that. And along with that, I'm sure you will also touch upon the diets and the nutrition and things like that. Yeah? Okay, over to you.
So, good evening, everybody. My name is Komal. I am a chemical engineer and a biochemist by training. I started my career with DuPont in foods and thereafter in intellectual property. And for the last 9 years, I look after the R&D and IP at SML. So climate change, it's a big subject and is no doubt the biggest challenge that the world is facing. But as Mr. Gandhinia pointed out, that for agriculture and for sustainable food production, it's the water, it's soil health. Soil health is a very, very complex subject. It's not been addressed. I think the Isha Foundation guys have been trying to drive it in a very, very big way. And it needs urgent attention, right? There's a quote that I'd like to state here. We know more about the stars in the sky than we know about the soil beneath our feet, right? So it's a very complex system involving new chemicals and live organisms, which all need to come together in order to ensure that we all will have a sustainable supply of food. And soil health today, if you see, is challenged with the excessive and cumulative synthetic fertilizer practice. There's old pesticidal residue. There's loss of beneficial microbes in the soil. There's declining organic matter, which has been pointed out by various other experts, and there's soil salinity. So all of these put together pose a threat not just to the quality of the food that's produced, but also sustainable food production. So while the Green Revolution and the current agricultural practices have actually offered us food security, they put a question mark in terms of providing a long-term solution in terms of quality and sustainable production. And the real question that we need to ask, with India now at 75 years and having sort of achieved food security is, can governments and policymakers incentivize farming to actually grow quality crops that actually meet the daily dietary requirements of the human population, right? It's very important to establish and reinforce the connection between soil health and human health. And therefore, the way we grow our food has become even more critical than it ever was. It's wonderful to know we don't have famines. It's wonderful we don't have these issues anymore. And every fertilizer or product out there or pesticide out there claims to add yield, because we all want to ensure that, we are food secure. But what is the impact of that on the quality of the production, right? How does that change the intrinsic properties of the food that's produced? So on one side, we're food secure. On the other side, let's say today more than 60% of the children under the age of 5 in our country in more than 15 states are stunted. And malnutrition is rampant. More than 60% of the women in this country in the childbearing ages are anemic, right? So we've got food security, but we don't have nutritional security. The USDA has allocated a budget of about $4 billion for strengthening food security and climate change. A leading university in the US has received a $10 million grant just for ensuring that there is adequate uptake of nutrients in specific crops. So it's a very big subject at hand that we're talking about, and it's very complex. Like we said, it's soil structure, and there are so many elements involved, and we need to ensure that they're adequately made available during various stages of the crop cycle. Similarly, in India, we've got the millets program that was initiated, as you know. And a lot of it was driven to provide, a richer nutrient source in terms of diversity in providing adequate nutrition and even giving productivity to farmers. There is a new I&M bill that has been proposed, which is under the works, and a lot of submissions have been made with respect to that. There's a new biocontrol regulation which has been proposed at the ministry. But one of the biggest challenges that India faces, I believe, and this is more specific to India, is the amount of incentive that is given to macro fertilizers, which disincentivize balanced nutrition in the country. If plants receive balanced nutrients, only if plants receive balanced nutrients, can we expect to have a balanced diet on our plates. If the plants don't receive balanced nutrients, they are going to be more susceptible to stresses due to climate change. And therefore, it's very important that we understand that it's one of the very important factors in addressing climate change in terms of incentivizing farmers to grow crops in a balanced way. The fertilizer policy today, okay. So the fertilizer policy or the subsidy policy, subsidies are given all around the world. But this year we doubled the subsidies, if you notice, because of the shortages that were experienced due to the war. And that only further disincentivizes the farmers from applying other nutrients which are also required for balanced crop yields, crop quality, nutrient uptake, and so on and so forth. And so what you have is a very imbalanced system out there which further subjects the crop to further losses, perhaps due to climate change, perhaps due to other stresses in the environment. Therefore, I think it's very important that technology and R&D and innovation agriculture and policymakers actually leapfrog the development cycle to not just address climate change and yield and food security, but to a higher level of producing good quality of food. And this will require integrated approaches with high nutrient use efficiency fertilizers, biofertilizers, biostimulants, crop protection with lesser residue or no residue. And this can change the way we grow food and finally address the long-term health of the population, because that is something that is being addressed. You know, we've increased life expectancy, but quality of life is also something that is to be seen. The government spends to the tune of 4,000 crores on addressing malnutrition in this country, and the expected budget actually should be around 40,000 crores. So where is that going to come from? You know, how long can you keep sustainably doing that? So, thank you.
So, thank you very much, Komalji. I think that was all excellent points you have brought out. The nutrition aspect, the balance between the health of the soil and the health of the humans. You know, nowadays, on many fora, you will hear this new word of One Health. One Health is a new concept that is coming up, that it is no longer the health of the soil or agriculture or animals or human beings to be seen separately. One Health actually looks at an integrated view of health across all the components of the world or the nature or whatever you call that. So health of the humans, health of the soil, health of the environment, these are all interrelated. So I think it's an excellent point you made, that if we have to fight climate change, we have to look at this as an integrated question and not just in bits and pieces. I think that's very good. I would also like to mention that next year, 2023, India will take the presidentship of G20. So Prime Minister Modi will be the president of G20 for next 1 year in 2023. It rotates among the 20 countries. 1 year every country will take up. So there was some discussions about what should be the agricultural agenda for 2023 among G20 countries, which Prime Minister can push forward. And the highest point which is being discussed, it is still being finalized, but the highest point which is being discussed is on climate resilient agriculture, followed very closely by the second point, which is sustainable agriculture. I think these are all very interrelated terms. You can't have sustainable food systems unless you have climate resilience among your food systems. I think these are all very important aspects that we must be looking at, and we will come back to you. I would like you to, in your next round, let us discuss a little more about how do we make farmers adopt these new practices. Okay, so thank you. Anand, so everybody says that technology and science are the keys, right? And you are the one in charge of technology and science. So please enlighten us on how you can solve climate change problems.
No, thank you first of all. Thank you Raj and Ram for the invite and being in front of this august audience. I think this is a very pertinent topic. 2 weeks ago, I was also in Punjab Agriculture University, where there was a national conference on sustainability and climate change. And one of the prominent themes that is coming up is, look, I mean, the farmer income is more or less stagnated, and our crop productivity has reached a point where we're no longer seeing that increase that we have seen through the decades of 1990, 2000s and the early decade of the century. And I think the biggest reason for that is what is happening in terms of climate change. This year is a good example with wheat, where you mentioned that we probably now are at our lowest stocks, in terms of our food reserves for wheat. And there was a significant impact on rice plantings. It was initially estimated 15% lower area planted, but it's now sort of recovered to maybe in the 6 to 7%. But all of this is because of what is happening with either increased temperature, decreased rainfall, very high intensity of rainfall in short bursts, as well as not having a lot of impacts of drought otherwise that are happening. And one of the only way we can mitigate this climate risk from a agriculture productivity is to breed crops with climate resilience and think about climate smart technology. I'll give you an example. When I was in Punjab breeding corn in early 2011, we had a hybrid called 31Y45, which was very much liked by all the farmers in Punjab. And in the next 5 years, the temperature of Punjab and UP has gone up by at least 3 degrees. And what we are seeing is that you see that the hybrids that the farmers grow are no longer able to give the productivity that they had given just 5 years ago, 7 years ago. But the example of what we can do with it, and a few people in this room have seen what was done with spring corn in India, is you could actually select for heat stress and heat tolerance and breed for it by doing targeted genetic selection, but also incorporating new technologies like genomic selections, precision phenotyping, so that you're ready for what is happening with climate change. So if I am selecting for today's climate, I will not be able to beat climate change. But if I'm modeling and selecting for what will come 4, 5 years down the line, as a breeder, as a scientist, that's my job to think about how things will evolve and then be proactive but not reactive. I think that is one of the most important things as a scientific technical forum that we can do. And embrace technology. And I think in today's world, everything that we are doing, we've talked about drones, we've talked about satellites, and there's a lot of this data that is now available for us to make much more educated decisions on how do we select for a given genotype or a given hybrid's performance in a target population of environments and build in this concept of stability. It is not new for breeders in India. They've successfully done this over a very long time. And that's why we are where we are in terms of what Mr. Ganeshan showed as the overall yields that we are seeing. But incorporating technology so that we are accelerating the change in genetic gain is what we can do well. So things like genome editing that was mentioned, identifying opportunities with using digital technologies, bringing in novel variation from exotics or wild types. All these are potentially opportunities that we can now tap more aggressively than we have done in the past. Thanks.
Thank you. I think, again, scientists, like you said correctly, have to work on what is required in future, not what is required today. And that's where actually all the CEOs sitting here have always had trouble with research people, that where we are investing, what will come out of it after 4 or 5 years, and will it suit the market at that point of time? I think that is always a big question in the minds of CEOs when they allocate research budgets. But that is a very important aspect that one has to understand the trends that are happening and plan for it. So I think we have Raj. Is Professor coming? No. Okay. So we have actually, if you see the Sustainability Development Goals, SDG 12 talks of responsible production and responsible consumption. Agriculture is a production activity, and production has to be done only to meet the demand. As businessmen, we all know that. Production is meant to meet demand. So as long as you are producing what is demanded by the customers, then you will get a proper price. If you produce according to your own plans and the customer wants something else according to his own plans, then there will be situations of surplus and situations of shortages. And that's what leads to a situation where we have more food grains in our warehouses, but we are importing 1 lakh crores worth of edible oils. So I think if we have to bring that kind of a balance into our production system and make it more demand-driven, a lot of role has to be played by policy. Government policies play a very important role in this, in terms of which crops, what is the crop portfolio we must follow. What is it that, like Komalji mentioned about nutritional security, and malnutrition in the country is very high. If we have to bridge that gap, we must produce crops which will give more nutrition. The technology people have to develop varieties which have more nutrition in the same grain, and then we must also have markets for those things. You can't sell what is called a value-added product which has higher nutrition in the normal market. It cannot go to the normal mandi, because then it will get mixed up with everything else and it loses its value. Which means that you need a system of closed loop system where there are contract cultivation systems, where there is what is called identity preserved supply chain systems, that from the farm to the fork, the identity of that nutritious food is preserved. Then only it captures the value. These are the things which need government support. These are the things which need policy support. We talk of natural resource management. Water. Water is the greatest boon we have. And if we are running out of water in the coming decades, which is also a part of the climate change that we are talking about, how to prevent that? What is the policy that can make sure that the farmers conserve water and not use too much water? We have never measured production of crops per liter of water. We have always measured per acre of land, but we have not measured it per liter of water. If we put some environmental cost on the cost of production of crops, what will be the cost of rice in the country? Right? Per kg, rice will no longer sell for 50 rupees. It will sell for 500 rupees. Right? So that is the cost of water that we are consuming at the rate of 5,000 liters per kilo of rice that we are producing. So I think we need to ask some of these questions on the policy front, that what is it that we are producing, and should there be some change in our crop portfolio? Number two, what is the rate at which we are consuming natural resources? Should there be a government policy change to conserve natural resources? I was a member of a committee headed by Dr. Paroda, and we made a recommendation to the government that all subsidies put together, if you take, including all the money we are giving to the farmers under different names in different states, if we put all of that together, it works out around 15 to 20,000 rupees per acre. Now, is there a mechanism to use it more efficiently to reward farmers who are following conservation practices, who are following sustainability practices? Because right now there is no incentive for the farmer to follow sustainable practices. Right? All our incentives are more oriented towards increasing production or using more resources like fertilizer subsidy, more chemicals like fertilizer subsidy. So we need to take an integrated view at the policy level of what we are trying to achieve and where will we land up in another 20, 30 years' time if we continue the same policies. So because Professor Chhatri has not come, I just wanted to add some of those points from the policy point of view so that we all can think about them a little more. We have last 5 minutes, so I'm coming back to all of you with the question I left with you. But please answer in 1 or 2 sentences that I didn't ask you a question. I'll come back to that. So I will start with you, Komalji. So how do we popularize whatever we are trying to do with the farmers? How do we make sure that they adopt the practices that we want them to adopt?
That's a very good question. I think that's a problem for any ag innovation company trying to drive change in terms of farmer practice. But there's multiple things that you need to do. There's partnerships, as you said, with food companies. There's grassroots level education that has to be done. Adoption of new practices is not easy because they're used to following something for years. It takes a huge thing to change the mindset of people who, have been through, the Green Revolution's been around for too long, and, these practices got set up in the in the 1900s, right? So I think it's a very, very challenging thing. I believe huge policy intervention is required. If, like we said, we want to leapfrog this. You've got UN Sustainability Developmental Goals. A lot of all of this can be addressed if early adoption is even understood at the policy level making process, right? Because dissemination of information to the farmers is a huge, huge task for, I would not say just one company, but even a group of companies, right? Because you have to invest into significant resources in trying to communicate this. You have to demonstrate it down at the farmer level. And it's not an overnight task. So while you've got, as Sadhguru's been pointing out, you've got 40 to 50 years of soil left and you really need to protect it, how fast can you do this?
Thank you for that. I will just add one more data point to what Sadhguru said. In the next 50 years, the world will consume double the amount of food that the world consumed in the last 10,000 years. Okay, this is a data point which many of you may not be aware. That tells us what the pressure that is going to be on the production system to actually feed the growing population, which will touch more than 9 billion, and then with reducing natural resources and with increasing climate change. So that gives you some idea about the challenge in front of us. So Dr. Liu.
Can I maybe add to what
Please.
you are saying about making farmers adopt all these new technologies and whatnot? I think one of the key factors is that by going around the world, I can see that industrial agriculture, that's what's practiced in developed countries. Farmers are making money, but when it comes to developing countries, developing areas, the farmers are really not being paid what they should be paid. I always say food is too cheap. That's a big problem, right? Farmers are not incentivized, to go beyond what they're doing. So if you want them to adopt all these new ag tech technologies and whatnot, farmers are really entrepreneurs. Doesn't matter whether they are from developing countries or developed countries. If they can see an ROI, return on investment, they are going to go for it, right? There's so much talk about food wastage at the farm level. 30% is wasted, and then in the supply chain, further waste occurred. But like I said, because food is too cheap, farmers are not getting a good return on investment. So this is a key issue that we need to address. And in many countries, of course, food is a very sensitive issue, right? In the poorer countries, maybe 30 or 40% of a person's income is spent on food, whereas in the developed world, it could be as low as only 15%. So you can see all this disparity between rich countries and poor countries, right? So to encourage farmers in poorer countries to really make those changes, adopt more efficient methods of production, we really have to look at pricing of food, right?
Very good point. In fact, if you have been observing Indian newspapers in the last 2 months, we are talking only of food inflation because it touched 7% or 6%. So we are more concerned about urban consumer than about the rural producer. And this happens in many developing countries, as you said, and in India particularly. The terms of trade are pitted absolutely against the farmer. And it is the urban consumer who gets the priority over the farmer's problems. So I think it's something also at the policy level, one has to look at it. And farmers have to get connected to the markets. See, if you don't give him the opportunity to discover his price, he will never get a good price. We have other issues with his practices and with his cost of production and things like that. How to use technology to reduce his cost of production. 52% of farmers' cost, and there is a data published by Government of India, that 52% of farmers' cost across the country among the crops is labor cost. If you want to increase farmers' income, you have to address labor cost first, not pesticide cost or seed cost. Seed cost is hardly 5%, pesticide cost is hardly 4%, and fertilizer cost is around 11% or something like that. All of them put together are around 20%, but 52% is labor cost. How do we reduce it? Which technologies we can use to reduce labor costs so that his profitability will go up? How do we connect him to markets so that his price realization can go up? These are the questions which have to be addressed at the policy level. And finally, Anand, if you can just touch upon very briefly that we talked of technologies and new products. What do we need from the government to make these technologies available to the farmer?
Right. Ram, you brought up a very important point in mentioning labor. And you know, I think these are all intertwined, right? So I saw a recent study from IRI which said, you know, if you can convert 2 million hectares of rice from transplanted rice to direct seeded rice, with using chemistry, you are saving 5,000 crores of annually just based on what you're doing in terms of new practice. If you're adding technology like herbicide tolerance into that whole package, that is about 7,500 crores. Now, you think about it, and this is not even calculating the amount of water we have saved, and this is just the savings, most of it coming from the labor that is going into doing some of this. And when we look at the climate vulnerability index, for example, for India, out of 500 plus districts, there are about 100 districts that are highly climate vulnerable, very high risk, and there are about 200 that are high risk. You know, I think in these districts, diversification is the need of the hour, and from a regulatory policy perspective, in terms of providing technology, you know, we have a lot of sentiment around rice and wheat, for whatever reasons it is. But we have seen today that there's a silent green revolution that happened on fruits and vegetables. And so diversifying the crops that are needed in some of these high vulnerability, you cannot boil the whole ocean, but what about those 100 districts that are the highest vulnerability index? Can we do something different so that we are preventing what is happening from a climate risk in these things? And technology can be very useful. We have applied a lot of these technologies into large cereals. You know, companies like Corteva have worked a lot on wheat and soybean and corn, but the same technologies can be applied across all the other crops, diversifying those agriculture. So policy should allow that. Thanks.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes time. Okay. So I think we don't have time for questions from the audience. So I will just conclude it, thanking all the panel members for their very valuable points that have come out. And so I think we have discussed that we have to breed and use other technologies for drought tolerance. We have to use modern machines like drones and others to reduce the wastage of chemicals and other inputs that we are using. We have to save water, soil and environment. Natural resource conservation is very important. And we have to actually undertake what is called sustainable food production. And we have to produce nutritious crops so that malnutrition can be addressed. And for nutritious crops like millets, how do we change the dietary habits of people? How do we promote such crops which are climate resilient? But at the same time, they should be made more palatable and more acceptable to the people who have to consume them. And we have to balance between different incentives that government runs, whether it is between fertilizers and others, or between water and power or others. How do you finally make sure that everything fits into a long-term strategy and objective towards sustainable agriculture. And then we talked of educating the farmers on the new practices, forming partnerships, education at grassroots level. And we talked of gene editing being a new technology, digital technology coming up, using them to actually reduce the impact of climate change. Temperatures will go up. That is a part of climate change. But how do we build our systems to manage that higher temperatures so that what we saw in wheat this year will not happen in future? I think farmers not making money, farmers should get more prices, and farmers should be able to sell his produce through a better price discovery mechanism so that he is able to reinvest that money into doing sustainable practices. And how do we orient some of the incentives from other inputs into incentivizing sustainable practices by the farmers. So these are all a few points which have come out. I hope you all had an enjoyable time and a good discussion. You all could get some meat out of that. And I thank the panel members and I thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our panelists and our moderator. Maybe request you people to please be on stage for another 2 minutes. I'm going to request our chairman and managing director, Sulphur Mills Group, Mr. Deepak Shah, to kindly felicitate our panelists and our moderator for an absolutely invigorating discussion that we've had here. Thank you very much, sir, for being here with us this evening. Mr. Ram Kaundilia, the moderator of this panel. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, can we hear it nice and loud for our moderator? Can we also hear it nice and loud for Dr. Anand Pandravada from Corteva? Thank you very much, Doctor, for being here. May I request Shri Deepak Shah to also felicitate Mr. C.S. Liu, Pacific Agri-Science, Singapore. Thank you very much. And we save the best for last, the women power. May we request you to also felicitate Ms. Komal Shah Bukhanwala, Sulphur Mills.
It's always women first, but when it is daughter, anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Shri Deepak ji. Thank you very much to our moderator and our esteemed panelists for doing the honors. It was indeed a very, very interesting session.